Hello and welcome back. Hopefully, you have had a chance to take a moment, rest. Maybe you still look like this one over here and you're just still curled up. That's also excellent. Uh, any of those things are great. What we're going to do here next, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can see our next steps in this adventure. Is we're going to kind of move on and move up, and we're going to take some of these ideas that we worked with already, this kind of like concept of inheritance. We're going to use that. We're also going to use all the things we learned about WebSockets, and we're going to take these kind of recipes that we wrote that allowed us to control OBS. Where'd you go, OBS? And we're going to write some kind of simple ways for us to start to build out a module that's going to let us actually control and drive everything um, that we might want to over here, or at least most of the things, and you'll have all of the tools that you need to be able to kind of keep improving and thinking about how to expand what we work on today. So let's dig in and get started on some of those pieces. So here we just when we left, we'd set up our little simple widget that's got a nice little lovely icon. I love that. That's great. Looks like here, let's just double check. Oh, wow, it's so big. Aha, it's enormous. Let's go ahead and in our transform, I missed this one step to go ahead and use our parent panel size. That should help give us a nice little cleaner look to our icon, hopefully. Okay. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to customize this component a little bit. And part of what we're going to do is we're going to just go ahead and take advantage of the fact that we can add custom parameters to our operators and work with those. If you haven't used custom parameters before, that's okay. That's, I hope, one of the exciting things about this kind of workshop, this opportunity. To get started, what we're going to do is we're going to right click on our widget, and we're going to go ahead and use this customize component pop-up. So this is going to pop up a little panel, and this panel is going to actually let us add our own parameters to this operator. So to get started, let's head inside of this, and we're going to need a WebSocket DAT inside here. So let's go ahead and add a WebSocket DAT, and I'm going to call this WebSocket OBS. Now, part of what I want to do is I want to create a page that's dedicated just to this operator. So I'm going to add a page here. And I think what I want to call it is, I'm going to double check my notes. So pardon me for one moment. Yeah, let's call this WebSocket config. So this way we've got a whole page that's just going to be dedicated to the parameters for this operator. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to grab these parameters and drag them right here into this parameter window and then bind these. And I'm going to bind the new par as, oh, I did that the wrong way. Let's bind new par as master. And binding gives us this nice kind of bidirectional communication. So if I were to open up the parameters here and look at our WebSocket config, if I turn this off, it would change our parameter over here. And if I turn it on over here, it would connect it over here. This is a nice kind of very handy mechanism for us to be able to change this inside of our component or outside of our component. We can kind of work with it either place. I also want to go ahead and attach our network address. Let's bind that as well, and our port. And let's see, let's grab that reset and add that also, because we just want to be able to have all of the pieces that we might use for this operator. We want to have it kind of nicely and quickly accessible for us here right on the top level. This is going to make sure that if you use this component instead of another project, you don't have to go inside the component at all. You can just make changes here from the top, which is ideally is part of what we want to think about when we're starting to build our own components is how can we make sure that we build them in a way that we don't actually have to mess with them inside. We can only work with them from the top. Great. I like that so far. Let's add another page, and I'm going to call this page OBS. So you'll notice, if I've added the page, but I don't have any parameters on it, it doesn't show up yet on our operator. That's okay. Because when we start to add some parameters over here, they're going to start to appear. So let's start with some of the ones that we know already. So we already have practiced with scenes. So let's add our scenes parameter. And so let's call this scenes. And this is going to be a list style parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and find my menu, is what we call it here in parameter land. Now, our menu, we actually need to add some names to it. And we'll remember that the name that we sent to OBS needed to match exactly the name that was in OBS. So let's just take a quick peek. We're going to set this manually. What you'll see in the example file that you've downloaded or you might download later is that in the advanced version of this, there's actually a method in there that actually reaches over to OBS and it says, tell me all the scenes, and then we build our parameters on the TouchDesigner side of it. And if we have time at the end, we'll actually look at how we can do something like that. For now, we can see there's scene 1, 2, 3. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open up this menu editor. I love this little thing. This is the little lister. Scene 1. If you haven't used lister before, it's really rad. Would recommend. Very handy. There's a lot of little like Python tricks with this. And they're, I find them really useful to experiment with and work with. So what I did is I just set all of my names and labels to be the same thing because I'm not worried about kind of making a distinction right now. And I made sure that those were going to match exactly what's in OBS. So scene, capital S, space 1, scene 2, scene 3. And I use this little menu editor because I find it's a little bit easier than trying to just write directly here in our kind of fields. So let's close that one. Thank you very much, Rob. Rob mentioned, he said, and my recent lister tutorials with Ivan. Ivan was very gracious and collaborated with me to be able to put together a list of, or a kind of comprehensive look at some of the interesting things you can do with Lister. So there's a soft plug for do more with Lister because it's really rad. And Ivan was super, super kind to spend a bunch of time kind of walking through those pieces with me. Let's build a few faders that we can control here for our desktop audio and our mic. So again, so we need to match these names, but this is going to be a situation where maybe, we're going to run into a kind of funny, interesting element here, which is okay. And we'll figure out how to work with these pieces. So over here, let's go ahead and add a new name that's called desktop audio. I think that's what we called it. We'll double check. And that is a float. Excellent. Let's double check just to make sure. Desktop audio. Love it. And then we had one more called mic. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put a section in here so we can kind of see a split for these. So we've got to kind of start with these 3 parameters. And I know that doesn't seem like very many, but we're going to get our bearings here to make sure that we have a clean sense of how to work with these. And then we can add some more if we've managed to make our way through all of these fun pieces. We're going to need a few other elements here inside of our network. We're going to work with this concept of inheritance. So let's add a text stat. And this one we're going to call OBS EXT. The way that I like to work with extensions, and you can work with them however you'd like it, I like to end my extensions with a capital EXT because that way I know that I'm treating it as an extension. And that probably means, for me, what that means is that I've written a class versus if I end it with MOD or mod, that means I've written it as a module and it's probably just functions. It's not necessarily a class. It's inside of that operator. So I'm also going to add another text stat here. And this one I'm going to call OBS actions EXT. So we're going to have 2 classes. We're going to have one that's our actions, and then we're going to have one that's our kind of more traditional kind of extension object that we're going to work with. We're going to set up just the essential pieces of our first extension over here because we're going to kind of do some initial work with this first. And that's A-okay, that's what we want to do. So this is our class. OBS is the name of it. I know, very makes perfect sense. I hope. And we're going to start with our init. So def init self and my op. We're going to assign my op to our own member variable here. So self my op. We're going to use capital M. So this is accessible by promoting our extension. And this is going to be my op. It's like repetition, repetition, repetition. So my op goes in, and then we assign it to my op. Cool. And then while we're here, let's go ahead and let's give ourselves our WebSocket. So we're going to put in a nice little clean reference to our WebSocket here for us. So I'm going to take advantage of, I know, my op. So my op.op. And we call this WebSocket OBS, I think. And let's make sure. So we check over here, WebSocket OBS. Why all this silliness? So all of this silliness is here so that if we ever reused this, this bit of code, what it's going to do is it would actually look for its parent, right? It would look for this operator, and then it would find the WebSocket, the operator called WebSocket OBS inside of it. This is kind of like a kind of cleaner way for narrowing down exactly where your operator is. And then we're also going to go ahead and add a message ID variable in here. And I'm going to just start by setting that to 0. And great. There we go. These are all the fancy things that we need to set up here in our first, our super class. That's how we're going to treat this OBS class. Let's come back and now let's open up our extension, our OBS actions. So we're going to use the same idea that we looked at earlier. So we're going to say OBS is going to be our mod. In this case, we're in the same level of our network, so we can just use mod OBS ext dot OBS, right? Because we'll remember we named it OBS right here. We're also going to need JSON, so let's import JSON while we're at it. And let's set up our class. So we've got a class. We're going to call this OBS actions. This is going to take OBS, and then we're going to do some of the same startup stuff, right? OBS dot init, and we're going to pass along this friend here, and this should be all the fun stuff that we need to do. Fingers crossed. Let's come back to Touch, and then let's go ahead and bring up our parameters here, and we'll just assign our extension nice and quickly. me.mod, and again, we're going to grab this extension here because we're going to rely on inheritance in this case. So the module that's OBS actions ext, and inside of that we use OBS actions, and we're going to pass it me. Oh, look at that. Self is not defined. Aha. What do we miss there? I forgot. I love a good typo. We've got to remember up here, self, my op. Okay, good. And then let's check over here, self and my, oh, I bet in our extension, we didn't pass that in. So we got a grumble here. Aha. Perfect. Me mod OBS actions ext OBS actions, and I've got to pass it me. Okay, great. Let's promote that. You're still grumbly. It's great. Excellent, excellent. And self is not defined. Good. And OBS actions. I love it. OBS.init. Aha, because I forgot in my init statement here to do, I forgot to init myself. Def init, my init needs a self and my op. I got ahead of myself. There we go. So we have to initialize our OBS actions to make sure that that's all correctly set up. Okay. Whew. So what happened there is I forgot to initialize this class. So this class needs to be initialized. And when this class initializes itself, it's going to initialize our superclass. So that's our kind of little wobble there, where fingers crossed, that's the biggest problem we run into. Okay, so now what's our next step? What do we start to think about next? Well, we have a few pieces that we should probably start to wrangle, right? So what we want to do is we want to have a nice, simple, and consistent way to be able to use these parameters that we're going to change and be able to drive what happens over in OBS really simply and easily. So we'll want a few helpers, and we'll want to be able to do a few of those operations as simply and easily as possible. Now, to get to these parameters, what we want to do is we want to use a parameter execute dat. And this is where we're going to run into one of my least favorite things, and hopefully one of the pieces that's a little less painful for us to work with. So what's the operator we're going to look at? We're going to look at our parent, and we're going to accept all of the parameters. And if we've worked with the parameter dat before, you know, you've probably played this game. Let me make sure that I put this in the right text editor. I think I want it to join all of its friends in this one. So the game that we've probably played here is that there's a value change, and then you say, okay, well, if my par's name is desktop audio, and there's no capitals because the way that custom operators work is that we have no spaces and there's only a capital, right? So this is the bummer, is like, okay, if it does this thing, then, you know, there's some special instruction if it's this, and then we need another case statement. So, okay, so elif the par name is Mike. Okay, so if it's this, then we do something special just for this one. And pretty soon we end up with this big long list of if-else statements all inside of this on value change that is not only frustrating to maintain, because you're going to have to maintain this, but also you end up in this situation where you've now broken apart your kind of Python management from a kind of class standpoint from what's happening in this parameter execute. So you've got kind of like split brain that you've got to run. And what would be really cool, and what we might like even more, is if the way that we thought about this was, instead of kind of wrangling all of this, if we were able to just pass the parameter object to our extension, and our extension could take care of all of the case management for us. So that's what we're going to look at here. We're going to say, okay, I want my parent, and I want our parent, I want to call a function that we're going to call parmap. We haven't written that yet. And I'm going to pass it the parameter. So now, rather than having a big long list of if, else, this, that, or the other, we're just going to call this one function, and we're just going to pass the parameter object right on along over to our extension, for our extension to do all of the kind of wrangling and what have you with it. Okay, cool. I love that. So let's come back to our OBS actions. So we're going to look at our OBS actions class. That's this one here in the bottom. This is where it's going to be important to kind of distinguish between which one is which. So in our OBS actions, let's go ahead and define parmap. So this is going to take self, and then we're going to use quargs, or keyword arguments, as a way to be able to take lots of different args here. And our parameter is our quargs. We're going to grab the thing out of it called par. So over here, we can see that we defined its name as par, and then we passed it the parameter. And over on this side, we're just going to extract that. And the reason that we use keyword arguments like this is that if in the future we decide that we want to add this previous, then we've got a clean way of being able to kind of grab that without having to rewrite any kind of like mess that we might have made for ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to grab this parameter. What do I do with this? Well, what I want to have next is I want to have a function map. So I want to know that if I get a particular parameter, I'm going to call some other function that I've written. So let's write a little function map. So we're going to define another function here, another method called funcMap. Cool name, I know. So we're going to give ourselves this thing called function map, or funcMap. And all we're ever going to pass into this is a single string called target function. And what we're going to get back is we want to return back to this what we grab from our actual funcMap. So inside of this, we're going to make another little dictionary called funcMap. I know, clever names. And our function map is going to contain string names, right? So our keys are going to match our actual parameters. So we've got desktop audio, for example. So let's look at that one. Desktop audio. Great. So what does this thing contain? This is going to contain its own little dictionary. Great. So it's going to point to a function. And then it's also going to hold an info object. And for now, we're going to leave the info object empty, which is, that's okay. That's lovely. And then our desktop audio, right? So again, this like seems like a lot of extra work, but I promise it's going to be worth it in the long run. So we're going to look at our parent. And what we're going to do is we want to look at the function called, let's call it audio update. Now we haven't written this yet. So as soon as we save this, TouchDesigner is going to complain, and that's okay. That's all right by us. I'm happy that it's going to happen because we know what's going to happen. So the last thing that I want us to do here is I want this function, I want it to return, right? So it's going to give back to us our funcMap, and we're going to grab from this dictionary this piece here, this string that we passed in, target function. So whenever we change a parameter, what we're going to do is we're going to check and see, do we have a function that matches that parameter name? And if we have a function that matches that parameter name, we're going to give back a dictionary that contains a pointer to the function that we want to use, and then all the information that we want to pass to that function. Again, this is a slightly more kind of intermediate idea. And part of the reason that we use this is it's a way to kind of clean up and simplify some things that might otherwise get really cumbersome to maintain in the long run. Okay, so let's take a look here. We should be able to save. Okay, ooh, no grumbles yet. Love it. That's excellent, excellent. Let's add this function over here back to our OBS class. So we called that, I think we called that audio update. Let's double check. Yep, audio update, great. So audio update, update. It's similarly going to take self, and it's going to take keyword arguments also. And for now, let's just put in a pass statement. So now we just have this kind of simple thing here. Great. I love it. So far, so good. This will all make sense while we've done this hard work here in just a moment, I promise. So our par map, okay, so what happens is that we're going to pass in our parameter from our data, from our parameter execute. Great. So I've got my par. What do I do with my par? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and my target, right, my kind of like target function is I'm going to use this self funcMap, right, this thing that we just wrote. And what I'm going to pass to this func map is I want my par name. So my parameter has a name, and I'm going to say, hey, give me back this thing for desktop audio or for mic or for you name it. Right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a try and accept block. So we're going to try to get a function out of this. So our function should be target.get func. Right? So this matches here. Great. And the info for this is going to be our target.get info. Excellent. And then what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to run this function, and we're going to pass to it a parameter value, which is going to be our par.eval. Right? So we still have that original parameter object. And then we're going to pass an info object as well. So this info here, we're going to then pass it right along to our function. Okay. Something is bound to go wrong. So let's accept, right? So we've got to try this. If this doesn't work, what do? Accept our exception as TD error. Great. And let's print our TD error. And 9 times out of 10, probably what this is going to mean is that you're probably missing a function. That's probably what it means. That's not every case, but that's probably the situation we're going to run into. Okay. So the next thing we can do is let's come back over here to our audio update. And we know that we're going to get a parval. That's going to be quargs get parval. And we know that over here because we've passed in this keyword that's parval. Cool. And we know that we've got an info that's going to be our quargs get info. Okay. So let's just try to print our parval. What I'll do after we have a working piece here is I'll paste both of these little bits into our chat. So I'm sure this is not going to work right the first time, but let's see what happens. Oh my goodness. Look at that. So what happened? I love this. Great. So we have all of these values get streamed over. And with any luck, what happens is that because we've written this, because we've written it this way, we should now be able to write a handle for this one, right? You're probably missing a function. We are indeed. Okay. So let's now figure out what happens if the name of the parameter, right? This is the name of our parameter. So in this case, we're going to want to do the same thing if our parameter's name is Mike. So we're going to call the same function. We don't need to like write any special pieces there. But we're going to go ahead and use this same audio update function twice. We don't have to write any more code down here. We can just use the same thing we've already written. And now this works both for our desktop audio and for our mic, which is rad. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and paste in the work that we've done here so far. So here's our, let's do first our OBS class. So OBS class, great. And then let's add our OBS actions class. So in case you're missing any of those pieces, hopefully they're all right there for you. So this is where, fingers crossed, it's going to get really fun and easy. Easier than if we had to like write an individual function for every single one of these. So we know, right? We know that we're going to do exactly the pieces that we expect. Okay, so we're going to come back. We're going to add some pieces to this info that are going to be valuable. So in here, in our audio update, or in our OBS class, let's do a few other little helpers. So I think one helper that we're going to need is we're going to need an update message ID little method. And we're going to pass it ourself. And we don't need to pass it any more than that because it's actually going to do all of the work for us. So what is it going to do? First thing it's going to do is it's going to find its message ID. It's going to add 1 to it, or excuse me, plus equals 1. Great. And then it's going to return back a string, because we'll remember we've got to pass a string with our message to OBS. We'll pass back a string of our self message ID. So this just increments our message for us, and it gives back to us exactly what we need to send our message. Cool. I like that. So far, so good. That's great. While we're at it, let's go ahead and let's also add a little simple helper to send our request. So we're going to define send request. Great. And I think send request, we can leave that lowercase. So the differentiation I make is that I make my methods lowercase if they're only intended to be accessed by the actual extension itself, and they're uppercase if they're intended to be promoted and something's going to access them from outside of the extension. This is kind of like a simple way of doing kind of private and public functions for your extensions. So send request is going to take a self argument. Great. And then it's going to take a payload. Great, so that's going to be a little JSON or a little dictionary. And then I'm going to add a debug keyword in here, and I'm going to set it to false by default, because this will let us kind of turn that on and off in case we need it. So our JSON payload is going to be json.dumps payload. Actually, I don't think we need that. For some reason, that capital letter looks weird to me. There we go, that looks better. Okay, so we're gonna turn this into a JSON object, and then we're gonna use our WebSocket, right? Our operator that we've defined up here. We're gonna send text, and we're gonna send this JSON payload. Easy peasy. If debug, right? So if that debug flag comes in true, then I wanna print that JSON payload. Actually, let's just print the payload. We don't need to print the JSON object. And in all the other cases, we can pass. This will mean that we can separate out how we're actually going to handle kind of checking to see whether or not something's working or not working. Okay, so far so good. So for our audio update, what is it that we needed to send, right? So the idea here is that we're going to call this function, and then we're going to send, we're going to send request, and then we need to send this some kind of payload, right? And so what's that look like? Our payload is a dictionary. We know it's a dictionary. And for our audio update, if we take a look back, we should remember that if we zoom out here and let's take a peek back at our basics, we needed a message type, an ID, a source, a volume, a decibel. Okay, cool. Let's just borrow this because there's no point in us writing this all over again if we don't need to. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come back on over. Let's take a look inside here. Let's get closer. And let's just put this right in place. Okay. Ooh, and I don't need this first bracket. Red. I don't need a second bracket. Oof. Extra brackets everywhere. Okay. So here, this is some interesting kind of stuff, right? So we printed out previously the parameter value. So the volume that we're going to pass, we can probably actually just send along our parval. That's great. This message ID, what we want to do, right? So this update message function actually goes, it returns this string that's our message ID. So let's actually just do this. All right, let's give ourselves a variable here for message ID, and this is going to be self update. Oops, update. Right, so we're going to call this little function, and it's going to give back to us an incremented message ID. Cool. So rather than having a hard-coded value there, we can just pass in our message ID. Excellent. Now we've got a really interesting problem because we're stuck in this situation where we need to know the request type and we need to know the source, but I don't want to write two functions to do that. That seems like it would be silly to do that and gross. What a bummer. But what we could do instead is we could put these two pieces into this info block, right? Part of the reason that we have this whole other function map is so that we can package up all the possible information that we might need when we call that function. So let's go ahead and figure out what that looks like. So we need both our request type. So let's go ahead and grab that. So info needs to contain a request type. Okay. And then it also needs to include a source. Okay, great. Source. I love it. So let's put those pieces in here. So desktop audio, this matches against an OBS desktop audio, right? With the space. Or actually, wait, that's the source. The source is desktop audio, but the request type, if we go back here and take a look, we'll see that the request type that we used was set volume. So let's grab set volume here. So set volume is what we're going to ask for. And the source is going to be desktop audio. Let's actually just copy this info block. We're going to use this for mic also. And this one is going to be mic instead. Right, so this one does this one does desktop audio. This one does mic. Cool. Back here, we can change up some of these pieces so that rather than having these hard-coded values here, let's go ahead and just grab those, right? So our request type, whoops, request type. Oh, and let's actually, we're going to get into trouble if we're not careful. Our request type is going to be info.get, right? So this info object is the same info object that's over here, right? Info. And what we want to grab from info is request type. Great. So our request type is our request type. I know. And we're going to pass into our payload our request type. Oh my goodness. Right? The difference here is that this is an actual variable, whereas this is a string. And we're going to do the same thing for source. So our source is going to be our info object. And from that info object, we want to get our source. And let's replace this now with source. Whew, goodness gracious. So now we've written this one audio update function, but this one audio update function works, we hope, for both of our parameters. So let's see if that's the truth. Let's bring up OBS. We have these pieces here. Oh, look at this. Our source is not defined. Okay, great. Love it. Perfect. Let's double check what we might have. Oh, look at that. Source is what we need that to say. I'm going to move this over to the left so we can see both OBS and TouchDesigner at the same time. Okay, look, good, great. JSON is not defined. Okay, let's make sure that we've imported JSON. Oh, we need to import it here. Import JSON. Okay. Oh, excellent, excellent. Snedden, again, typos. Spelling was always my weakness as a kid. So this is a good opportunity for me to practice very carefully all of my spelling. So let's hear. This was your probably WebSocket snend. TD WebSocket has no snend text. Send request. I think that's right here. Send text. There we go. All right. I think we're out of the woods for errors. And now we're here. And oh, cool. No updates yet. That's excellent. Aha. So our WebSocket's on. Let's reset that. Cool. And I see our sending messages. Okay, great. Desktop audio. So it looks like all of those are going. Excellent. So we're getting closer. That's perfect. And let's see if we have any other data here. Use decibel, false. Good, good, good. All of those pieces look like they're working correctly, but look at this. Look at this. We're still going to our WebSocket echo. So let's fix this. We want to go to localhost. And then our network, our port address is 4444. Okay. Whew. And magic. So now we're able to control our audio parameters here from TouchDesigner over to OBS. That looks pretty rad so far. That's exactly what we hoped it might do. I love that. So what if, let's see if we can write like a nice little clean function to handle this scenes challenge, right? Because that's the next one. If we could kind of knock that one out, I think we'd probably feel good here. So let's go back, or actually before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. Here's our OBS class, in case you're missing it. And here's our actions class. All right. So our trick then, right, is we're going to start here in our actions class. And we're going to start with our parameter name. So the parameter name that we've got is scenes. Excellent. I'm pretty sure it's scenes. Yep, scenes. Okay. What does that have? That has its own dictionary. And it's probably going to have some of these same pieces, right? It's going to have a function that's attached to, and let's call this update scenes. It's going to have an info object. So we're going to want to know, right? We probably have a request type that's attached to that. And let's take a look here to remember what our request type was like for our basics. And here in our scenes, our request type was our set current scene. Okay. We don't need to worry about a source in this case. What we are going to have to worry about is a scene name, but we can actually handle that. Instead of handling that here on our OBS actions, let's go ahead and take care of that here in our actual audio scenes. How about scenes update? That's the function that we're going to write. So scenes update. We'll come back here. Let's define a new function. So scenes update. It's going to take self. Similarly, we're going to take our quargs, our keyword arguments, and we're going to do the same idea, right? Our parval is going to be our quargs.get parval. Excellent. In this case, our parameter value is probably going to be exactly matched to our scene name. So we're going to be able to reuse that. Our info object is going to be our quargs get info. Great. Our request type is going to be our info. We're going to get from our info our request type. Excellent. In this case, we know the things that we need here, right? The message ID is the next piece we need, and that's going to be our self update message ID. Now we just need to format our payload. That's going to be a nice little Python dictionary here. Request type. What's our request type? Well, we've already got that taken care of. And then we've got a message ID. Great. We have that set up too. It's our message ID. Okay. We've got a, in this case, remember, let's double check here. We've got this scene name. This is the last piece that we've got to grab. So let's grab this piece. Oh, thank you very much, Rob. That's very kind of you to say. Hopefully this works. So our scene name, and in this case, our scene name is going to be this parameter value, right? Because our parameter value is actually, if we take a look over here, right? That's this friend right here. And we already made sure that our names matched. So hopefully that's a nice little matchy-matchy. And then the next thing we do is self, and we're going to send requests. We're going to use that same thing we've already written, and we're going to pass along our payload. So let's take a look. We'll boop this over the side. Let's see what happens if we change from scene 1 to scene 2. Oh, look at this. Oh, we're missing something. That's great. None-type object has no attribute get. Great. And that probably means that we misspelled something somewhere. Info.get. Great. Great. Let's make sure we've got a function that matches. All right. Scenes update scenes, SCENES. Okay. Let's make sure so when we see this none-type object has no attribute get, that probably means we failed here. So let's see if we can print our par. That might be our first place. Oh, wait, I think it worked. Let's check. Scene 1, scene 2. Ooh, so fancy. So this is a nice kind of like clean way for us to have those pieces working. I think I just hadn't saved my actions or my other class. So I'm gonna, one more time, I'm gonna copy and paste here these pieces. So this is our OBS class. And then our actions class. There we go. So the last thing I kind of want to leave you with here, right? We've seen how we can automate these pieces, but it's also worth taking a moment to appreciate that, oops, not in this reference, but in our reference here, the API for this, which I will find the webpage for it here at some point, right? There's a ton of different options that we can kind of see here. And one of those includes events, great. We could also, if we take a look down here at our requests, we can do things like get media sources, create sources, get source list. So if we want to know all of our sources, or we wanted to know all of our scenes, or we wanted to know all of our transitions, what we could do is we could say, hey, what are all my scenes? And with the information that we get back from OBS, we could rebuild this parameter. And in fact, what you should see, hopefully, in our example, so this is actually the one that's built out in the repo. There's a whole other set of slightly more advanced kind of ideas here. And this does some of those exact pieces. I think the most fun and the one that I would encourage you to look at is this audio page. And what happens here in the audio page is when you use this update widget pulse, what our widget will do is it will actually reach over to OBS. It will ask for all the audio sources. It will destroy all the parameters on this page, and then it will rebuild them with names that match what exists in OBS. So this is a kind of way that you could think about how your widget might build its own parameters that are a mirror of what exists inside of OBS. So that's the kind of idea I'm hoping that you'll be able to explore after this, and to really be able to dig into ways to remotely control and drive other applications from TouchDesigner. So you can have kind of one application that you're using for all of your streaming and remote production kind of needs. Whew. That was a wild, crazy ride. There was a ton that we covered here today. Hopefully that's helpful and useful. If you get stuck, please, by all means, take a look at the repo, take a look at both pieces of it. All those elements exist there. don't hesitate to reach out and say hello. I'm more than happy to answer questions if I can. The world is busy sometimes, so I'm not always fast at replying, but I do try to reply when I can.